What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Acts of Creation. And on this week's lesson, we talk a little modulation and a little Beatles. So in a recent FAQ, the topic of modulation came up, and I wanted to expand on it in a lesson because there are a lot of requests for it. And to do so, we're going to take a look at a Beatles song, because if anybody has mastered the craft of songwriting, it's the Beatles. They can cram a whole lot of advanced harmonic ideas in 2 minutes, as we'll see. Okay, so the song we're going to look at is Lucy in the Sky Diamonds, and I'm not teaching you the song, we're just going over the changes. Okay, so we are in standard tuning, and there are 3 key changes, or 3 keys in this song. We have A major, moves up to B flat, and it moves to G. Okay, so we have 3 modulations and a couple of ways to modulate, okay? And let me preface this by saying, if you don't know what a key is, if you don't know how to craft chord progressions, or you're just learning, if you don't know what a 1-4-5 is, or a 2-5-1 is, if you don't know what a scale formula is, then the idea of modulation or applying the concepts of modulation are going to be difficult because they all reference those things. Okay, so if you're not familiar with those, brush up on them. Try to get familiar with them because modulation concepts will make more sense. Okay, but that said, I'm sure a lot of you already include modulation, you might not even realize it. Okay, so like I said, we have the 3 keys, and 3 different riffs, and 3 different keys. And we're going to talk about the second one first, okay? But I guess before we do that, let's mention a couple of the other types of modulation that we're not really going to get into detail here, okay? Direct modulation. You could argue that riff 1 to riff 2 in this example is going to be direct modulation, okay? And direct modulation sounds exactly what it is, and that's just directly jumping to a new key. It can be abrupt and abrasive, it could be unsmooth, and it's kind of hard to pull off out of the blue because it's going to be noticeable to your ear. Okay? You hear this type of modulation a lot in like pop songs when the chorus repeats at the end of the song, right? You have the chorus and then it repeats, but it moves a step higher, right? So it has this building kind of sensation, like it's getting more and more impactful. Okay? So it has its purpose and it works. Okay? The other type of modulation, again, which is hinted here, is going to be parallel modulation. And parallel modulation is when you shift from a major key to a minor key, right, with the same root. So you go from A major to A minor, okay? The root is parallel between the two. Okay, another common one. You hear it a lot, more than you think, okay? A good example of that is if I'm just strumming some chords, let's say in the key of C, and then all of a sudden on one of those chords I'll borrow from the minor and then continue the chord progression in minor. Okay? So I can go C, G, F, F minor, now I'm in C minor. Alright, that is parallel modulation. You're borrowing from the minor keys. Okay, so the big one, and probably one of the most common ones, is common chord modulation. And that is when you have a chord that's common, the same, in 2 different keys, and you use that chord as a pivot chord, right, to connect your ideas and to connect your chord progressions. And you see that, you kind of see that the most here. Okay, so we're going to talk about the first riff in A major at the end because there's not a whole lot of modulation there, but the harmonic analysis of it can get a little geeky if you want to. So we'll do that at the end because I don't want to bore everybody right away. Okay? Whew! So let's get going. Common chord modulation. An oversimplification of the first harmony of the first riff is A, A7, D, D minor. And then we're going to transfer to B. Okay, so this is an example of common chord modulation, okay, and parallel modulation. That's why I said that this harmonic analysis can get a little tricky. So you're on D, and then the shift's down to D minor, which is borrowed from the parallel minor, right, from A minor, from A major to A minor, okay, and then the D minor chord is common in A minor and B flat major. Okay, it's the 3 chord. Alright? So we're using that chord to kind of connect our ideas. So you have this A, A7, D, here's our common chord, and then new section. Now we step up to D, okay? Again, we know that D is not in the chord, in the key of B flat, right? At all. But we're gonna go to G, because the D is the 5, right, of G, which is the next key. Okay? And I'm gonna take a quick pause here and talk about that, and reference what I was talking about at the beginning. One of the major things in harmony is a 5-1 relationship, meaning the 1 chord and its 5 chord or its dominant chord. That's used to change keys and modulate very, 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 very often, almost all the time. Okay? So being able to spot those is important. So we use that D chord, and now this is when the chorus is Lucy in the sky. That's this part. And this is a 1-4-5. Very simple progression. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what a 1-4-5 is or what a 1-4-5 sounds like, that's what it sounds like. Okay, and what does that mean? It means G is our 1 chord, 1, 2, 3, 4, G, A, B, C is our 4 chord, D is our 5 chord. It's a 1-4-5 chord progression. Okay, so we use a common chord here to get to the B. All right, and then I guess you can argue that this C chord, okay, again, now we're gonna get a little geeky with things here. This C chord that was in Riff 2, if you know your chord scale, you should all be going, hey, wait a minute, Greg. The 2 chord of B flat is C minor. Why are you playing C? This is a harmonic thing called secondary dominance. Okay, you're playing basically, instead of playing a 5-1, you're playing a 5 of 5 to 1, again, which is very common. So if you notice, the chord progression is B flat, C, F. So again, if you're familiar with your dominant 5-1 relationships, you'll know that F is the 5 of B flat, C, D, E, F. Okay, but what's the 5 of F? F, G, A, B, C. Right, so it's 5 of 5. Okay, and when we talk about Riff 1, you're going to see this again. Okay, so this is our common chord because C is in the key of G, so we're using that chord as a connection between the 2 keys. All right, so I hope that makes sense. Okay, so we have some common chord modulations. Okay, and you can argue or discuss, I don't really argue about anything, that maybe the shift from from A to B flat is direct. Because let's talk about this for a second. So the opening riff is played A over G, A over F sharp, A over F. Okay, so what does that mean, over? So I'm playing an A chord, and I'm changing the bass note, the lowest note. So A, and then the A chord over G, and then the A chord over F sharp, and then the A chord over the F. Not in the key, this F note. Okay? So I have A, and what do I get when I put a G here? So an A chord is A, C sharp, E. If I put a G at the end of it, I get an A7 chord. Where we're just doing an inversion, putting it in the bass. Now I have an A over F sharp. What are these notes? Right? If I have F sharp, A, C sharp, E, I kind of have an F sharp minor chord there, right? But we're leaving a note out, right, on purpose because it's not being played, but it is in the melody. Okay? If I add a D to that chord, now I have D, F sharp, A, C sharp, E. That's a D major chord. okay? And if I just change that F sharp to the F, now it's a D minor chord. So hopefully that allows you to see that my oversimplification of the harmony is A7, D, D minor, which is a common chord to B flat, okay? That can kind of get lost in a little bit in the harmony because there's a keyboard sound, it's the Beatles, it's an acid trip, it's hard to hear. You know, so those segues can be kind of rushed or quickly or hard to distinguish, okay? So that's a lot of fun. So we have direct modulation, parallel modulation, common chord modulation, which is what we find here for the most part. The common chord modulation is when you borrow a chord is common in two different keys, right? So, and then we have the parallel modulation, which borrows from the minor, and then we have the direct modulation, which you just change keys, right? And you see this a lot in metal, more often than not, right? Because when you craft metal riffs, you're not necessarily outlining chord progression. A lot of great metal riffs are static. They don't really have a lot of harmonic movement. So a lot of times you're playing a riff and then maybe you'll just move it down a half step. Well, that's direct modulation. It's good for you. All right, so let's do more of this stuff. It's a lot of fun. Leave me any questions and comments down below. Down in the description you can find a link to the tabs for this PDF and Guitar Pro. I'll have these parts written out with some notes from the analysis, and that is a brief little talk about modulation. So as always, let me know what you come up with, and I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.